The Lifestyle Show, presented by Selina MacKenzie.
Now, the book of our first guest today provides a much-needed exploration and examination of honour abuse, violence and killings from a psychological perspective. She's a leading authority on the subject, and I'm glad to say she joins us now. Welcome to the show, Roxanne Khan.
Hi, Selina. Thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, especially as it is the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence.
Is it really? I didn't realise that. That's a good thing. It's a very tough one to talk about and to understand. So I'm just going to ask you the basics first of all. Am I correct that an honour killing is usually the murder of a female, and it's perceived as somebody who has brought dishonour on the family?
I think you've just covered it in a nutshell, Selina. I think that's the really broad understanding of what honour abuse, violence and killing is. At the same time, there's so much that's going on underneath all of that understanding, and this is what the book gave me, an opportunity to really explore that in some sort of depth. And as you mentioned, Selina, it's from a psychological perspective. So this is something that hasn't been done before, and I suppose there's some recent cases that you may have heard about. They're certainly making global news, which really ties in with that. So you may have heard of Sarah Sharif.
Yes, yeah.
Yes. I mean, the absolute tragic killing of Sarah, but at the same time, Giselle Pellicot in France.
No, I don't know that one.
Right. It's interesting. If I can just talk about that for a moment. Sarah Sharif and Giselle Pellicot. So Pellicot is a 71-year-old French woman, and Sarah is a 10-year-old British girl, and their lives seem totally worlds apart. And that's at first glance, and I think that's what I was talking about when you look at things first of all. But both of them, despite being seemingly to the other ends of the spectrum, that they share a very sad and tragic commonality. Which is that both of them were harmed by people that they should have been able to trust. So you mentioned that you knew about Sarah. Sarah was abused by her father, and I apologise for using explanations that seem very sad, but he did beat her to death, and in court it was revealed she suffered injuries that were comparable to those of a person in a car crash. So that's the horror of that. But at the same time is Giselle, a massive case at the moment, and she was abused by her husband and also 51 other men who he invited to abuse her in their home over many years. So both have been under intense media scrutiny, with trials revealing really intimate, distressing and irreversible aspects of their lives. But the start, and I will bring this back to honour abuse, Selina, because I think it's really linked to this, and I wanted to share it with you. One stark difference is that Giselle, she's across the world. Everyone's talking about her. She survived the horror of her abuse, and Sarah, the 10-year-old girl, sadly, she didn't. And many of us who work with victims or not, we find both or either of these cases really difficult to stomach. Now, I've been a psychologist for about 20 years, and I've experience in forensic psychology research, and I've also been a senior lecturer for 20 years. And I've realised that there's certain types of harm that are overlooked. For example, sibling abuse, which is actually the most common form of abuse in the family, but the least talked about, and the same for honour abuse. So I'm tying together Sarah's case and Giselle's case because they're currently in the media spotlight. But despite the brutality in both cases, discussions of Sarah's death have focused on her family's culture, because she was born and raised in England. She had a Polish mother and a Pakistani father. And the discussion is suggesting that his violence, which is brutal, was part of his culture. Yet there's very little discussions of Giselle's culture, beyond the fact that she's French. And Giselle herself's challenging this. She's talking about, we need to talk about macho patriarchal society. And this reminds me of an anecdote. So bear with me, Selina.
Yeah.
When I was a student, I heard my professors say that when ice cream sales rise, so do violent homicides. So this got us all thinking, what does that mean? Should we blame ice creams for murders? And the answer is no. But it's an example of a correlation when two things happen at the same time, which is often confused with cause, that one thing causes the other while ignoring another factor. For example, the reason why ice cream and homicides are correlated because of the hot weather.
So I think, okay.
I better get to that end point.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but so it's not really a surprise when it comes to honour abuse that we've confused correlation with causation, that, culture causes it, but actually it's correlated with it. As human beings, we're bombarded with information each day, and we hear so much about crime constantly. We all have to make quick judgments about other people and who we feel safe with and if they present a danger. So that's what my book was really rooted in. It was unpicking all of this complex information and trying to make sense of it for myself, but also to make sense of it for practitioners and researchers and the police and judges. So that's really where that's come from.
So, Roxanne, I understand there can be abuse in any culture. Abuse is abuse. It can run across any culture, any nation, any country or religion. But as far as let's take Sarah's case with a Pakistani father, there's no excuse, obviously, whether it's called an honour killing, which makes it sound a bit more grand. There's no excuse for killing a child or killing any female. But is it because he has been brought up that way by his parents and it's his culture and his religion to do that?
I think that's a really interesting question, Selina. And I think it's taken me 2 decades to make sense of it myself. And I work in this area every day. And what I learned, and I have conducted extensive research trying to make sense of it, working with victims and also have worked with perpetrators, trying to make sense of it all. And what we're finding in the research, that basically quite often it's pushed aside, honour abuse, and it's dressed as a form of abuse that only happens in, say, typically Muslim families, which is untrue. In fact, there's quite a wider cultural aspect in all forms of male violence against women. Now, let me suggest this, or let's think about this. There's the terms honour abuse, and then there's also honour crimes, but then there's also crimes of passion. So when people are abusive, let's call them perpetrators, use the term honour in different, it's an honour killing, honour violence. It's mostly in a culture which we call a we culture, when the we is more important than the I. So we cultures are like Mediterranean, Turkish, Asian states, southern states of the United States, for example, Texas. So the upshot of that is that in these cultures, male honour, the masculine honour or the family honour must be defended. It's so important. So if everyone must defend that, even if it means using aggression. Now, if that's we cultures, we have, for example, over in the UK or North America, is me cultures. That's when the individual is more important than the group. Everybody has an expression of themselves and what they want to do. And quite often, passion is used an excuse to describe violence or homicide when a perpetrator is angry or jealous. And you hear that as a defence. So passion and honour, there's very little difference between those explanations, and they're both universally positive and beautiful, even romantic words, but they've been used for a very long time throughout history to justify and excuse the abuse of typically women. And at the same time, the use of the word passion and honour, it ends up making women feel ashamed of being abused, being a victim of abuse, and at the same time, their pain tends to be minimised. the victim blame language suggests that they're to blame. And at the same time, an abuser's explanation for harming them makes them and their crimes seem more understandable and palatable. I'm just going to think of another example, might be, like child prostitutes. Mm-hmm. You can't suggest that a child can be a prostitute because they have no choice in the matter, or a child soldier. So both of them are victim blaming. And in the same way, crimes of passion and crimes of honour, at the root of this, it seems the researchers found that there seems to be very dominant and aggressive men who abuse women. And they maintain that through controlling or blaming the victim, either by saying passion, I did this because I cared too much for her, or I love her and I got jealous, or honour, that she acted dishonourably, so therefore I punished her. They're both justifications. It's a catch-22, unfortunately, Selina.
Yeah. I was reading, actually, that in some countries, honour killings are actually legal. I think Jordan is one of them.
There's no actual legal sanction for honour killings, but there are some countries that have a lower, so they can be held under lower jurisdiction. So, for example, in Italy, it was only very recently that honour killings, so if a father or a son was involved in a killing or crime of honour, they would get a lesser sentence. So that was quite recently. And I think this, again, is because a lot of the, and I hope it's okay to say, a lot of the judiciary is run by males.
Yes.
So here we have that catch-22 where it seems that it's legal, but when you start digging around, you realise that at the root of this, there's a few very coercive, domineering males that seem to control everyone around them. And that, I would say, is the main difference between, say, honour abuse versus other forms of domestic abuse. In domestic abuse, it's usually one perpetrator and many people will try and defend the victim, even though often she might get blamed. In honour abuse, everyone gets dragged in, even if they don't want to be involved in it or not, because they themselves might be punished. And I think if you know the case of Banaz Mahmood, who I think is one of Britain's most notorious honour killing, about 20 years ago. Her sister, who's also a survivor of forced marriage, she opens the book. She's written the opening part of that. So she gives, the book, within the book, the victim's voices throughout. And I think the more I listened, the more I understood, and the less I rely. I learned so much from listening to victims' voices.
So you've got some first-hand personal accounts and case studies in the book.
Yes, so and live cases as well. The Scottish victim of forced marriage, Shaheen Hashmat, she's done a TED talk on this, and she's written the conclusion. In the book also, because I'm the director of a research group called Harm Network, and one of our ambassadors of the Harm Network is the police detective who investigated Banaz's murder. And it was a groundbreaking investigation. Her name's Caroline Good. And she's in the book as well. And collectively, we all work together and we recognise it as a form of gender-based violence. And another reason why I'm excited, because the book's out tomorrow. It's 16 days of activism, so your timing is impeccable to be talking about this. And yes, victims' voices are at the heart of the book throughout.
Excellent. I'm glad we got the timing right. So HARM stands for Honour Abuse Research Matrix?
That's correct, yes.
Great. So I read that the book's in 3 parts. In 2 parts. The first part, the book focuses on the teaching and research, and the second provides an overview of the psychology, basically.
Yes, so if I wanted to go anywhere to find out about honour abuse, I had to scour through loads of websites, and then half of those were incorrect, and then I had to go to the government web pages. So I wanted to create something that, if you want to know anything about it, it's the Bible of knowledge when it comes to this. So I collected all the information there. Firstly, covered about how we can learn about domestic abuse and honour abuse in the first part. The second part is information on statistics and how frequent it is, but also I've developed the first model to explain perpetrators of honour abuse. As you mentioned earlier, Selina, that what do we know? Is it based in somebody's culture? Is Sarah's father, is it in his culture? So I really wanted to unpick that. And part of that is the reason I was able to develop this model. And by model, I mean an explanation of why and how honour abuse might occur, because I think a lot of people all of us have really struggled to understand it. So I think that many practitioners, police, and people with an interest in true crime, they will really get an understanding and a grip of something that's so complex to understand, really.
It is complex, and I think it's something people are a bit loath to speak about.
Yeah, I was thinking recently and talking with my colleagues, and I remember, I'm going to give my age away, Selina, because I remember when That's Life was on television.
So do I.
Lovely Esther Ransom, but do you remember that because of their conversations, these very difficult conversations about child abuse, that they set at Childline?
Yes.
And that was quite influential on me as a child. I remember thinking, people didn't talk about child abuse, and it's quite surprising to talk to people who are younger now, and they seem surprised that we didn't always talk about child abuse. And now we talk about it openly on the radio. Yeah. We didn't have these conversations in the 70s, and the fact that women couldn't have a divorce, that it was perfectly legal for a husband to beat his wife right until the 60s. There's been so much legislative change in a relatively short period of time. So for me, this is a natural progression. Conversations like this will help people understand. And I think in the next generation, it'll become common knowledge and we'll understand it better.
Yeah, and quite right too as well, quite right too. Well, as always, we sell our guests' books on our website, on the bookshop, talkradioeurope.com. For anyone that wants to buy it. It's called The Psychology of Honour Abuse, Violence and Killings, and it's by Dr. Roxanne Khan, who we're speaking to now. We mentioned harm, Roxanne. Is One Evidence another one of your websites?
Yes, it's On Evidence. I realise we should. Everyone says One Evidence because it looks like that. Harm was doing so well at connecting people, and it's a group of people with just an interest in crime and abuse, and it's everyday people. So please feel free to get in touch and join us. And On Evidence is an offshoot of that. So we work with crime commissioners, we work with activists, we work with women's groups, we work with men's groups, because men can also be victims of honour abuse.
Yeah.
So we work collectively to do that and help people with training and understanding that at the same time.
Great stuff. Well, thank you so much for sharing just a bit on the show today. People will have to get the book to find out more. Thank you, Roxanne.
Thank you, Selina, and thank you, everyone. It was great to chat today.
Great to chat to you. Take care. Bye-bye.